Welcome to PK's Horizon, the channel that traverses and explores the horizons in technology-related areas in an approach to expand yours. Let's traverse together. Today I will show you how to use Java's GridBagLayout to make JComponents, in this case JPanels, adjustable in terms of size at runtime. By the end of this tutorial you will have a solid understanding of how to create dynamic and customizable user interfaces. So here is what we are going to build today. As you can see, we have a frame with multiple panels. We have a main panel, that is the panel with this white border that contains two other panels. One left panel and one right panel in blue. And then we have some kind of control panel at the bottom that is actually fixed in height. So you can see when I resize the frame window, everything adjusts except the height of this control panel. And what is special about this now is that we can actually change the width of these two panels. So if I use this slider here, I can adjust the width using the GridBagLayout weight X constraint. And yeah, this is it. We will start by creating all the panels, then adding the button and the functionality, and the last step will be to build this slider here as a little bonus. Alright, this is going to be a tutorial, so I try to explain everything step by step and line by line. Enjoy! And I've just created a new project and with a main method and a new class named myFrame. And we will start from here. So this myFrame needs to extend from JFrame. So let's write extends JFrame. It automatically does the import from Swing. Next we are going to initialize and declare some variables that we are going to need. So we start with JButton and call myButton. That is the button for setting our 50-50 ratio of the two panels. Let's just already also initialize it, so new JButton. Next we need our actual GridBagLayout. Call it GBL and create it. Next we need GridBag constraints. Call it JBC for example, and create it. Then we create some of our panels. So let's start by creating our main panel. Let's call it main panel, new JPanel. Then let's create our left and right panel that is placed inside of our main panel. So left panel equals to new JPanel and our right panel. And we also declare the variable for our slider. let's call it my slider. Next, we continue by creating the constructor of my frame. So just my frame. And we start by setting some important properties. For example, we need to set the default close operation. So we call this dot set default close operation and say that we want to exit on close. Let's also set a preferred size of our frame. So set preferred size, and let's create a new dimension for that, and I'm just going to use 1500 by 1000. Next, let's call the pack method. And what I also like is to set location relative to null. So when we start our application, the new window is opened in the center of our screen and not at the top left. And really important, we need to set the visibility to true, otherwise we can't see our frame. Okay, let's set the layout of our frame. For the frame, we are going to use border layout. So let's create a new border layout and give it to our frame. So for the fixed height of our control panel, I create an integer variable named control panel height and just start with 100. We set the layout of our main panel, so set layout, and here we are using our GridBagLayout, so GBL. Then let's create a border for our main panel to make it visible so that we can better see what's going on. So let's use not the border layout but the border factory and create a line border, and I just choose the color white for this one and a thickness of 10. Okay, let's also set a size, a preferred size of our main panel using a dimension again. Dimension, and we use for the width of our frame, and we get this with this, so our frame and get width, and we do the same for the height. So we say get height, and we subtract our control panel height, so that there's some space at the bottom for our control panel. So next, let me just write the code for the GridBag constraints, and when I wrote that out, I'm going to explain it to you. We use the weight property of GridBag constraints, and this weight property makes us able to decide how much space each component is allowed to allocate. The values start from 0.0 up to 1.0. You can basically think of these as percentages. weight x is for the horizontal spacing and weight y is for the vertical spacing. So for example, if we say here weight x is equals to 0.3 and we give that to our left panel later, and here we say weight x is to 0.7, so basically 70%, and we give that to our right panel later, that means that our left panel gets 30% of the space, and our right panel is getting 70% of the space. And in most applications, these have a default value of 0.0, which means that the size of the displayed components is fixed and not adjustable. Okay, and what we also need to set, we need to set the weight y to any value but not 0. So I just set it to 1, that our components allocate the vertical, the whole vertical space that is available to them. And we also need to set grid x to 0 for our left panel, and then for our right panel to 1, to say, okay, that our left panel should be placed in column 0 and our right panel in column 1, so they are next to each other. And we also need to call the fill, or set the fill property of our GridBag constraints to both, so that the whole vertical and horizontal space that is available is used. Okay, now let's actually just for visibility, let's set a background color for our left panel, and I'm just using red in this case. Let's add the left panel to the main panel, so main panel dot add left panel using the GridBag constraints that we created, and say that these now belong to the left panel. So these properties or these values that we set here are now basically connected to the left panel, if that makes sense. And then we change the grid x and weight x to grid x to 1, so column 1, and weight x to 70%. And also that set the background color to blue, for example. Also add our right panel to the main panel, so main panel dot add right panel, and add our GridBag constraints to the right panel. And now we can also add our main panel to the frame. So this dot add main panel, and we have a border layout, so we need to say border layout and the area where we want to place it. So I want to place the main panel in the center, so I call border layout dot center. And now we should be able to already see something, so let's just have a look. Of course, what we forgot is to actually create our frame. So we need to go in the main and create a new frame object and run our application. And what we have is our main panel with the white border that contains the left panel and the right panel in red and blue. And as you can see, the size, or it all adjusts to the frame size. So next we are going to create our control panel. So let's create some space. We don't have created that globally, so we only create it in the constructor, because all of these we need later in the action listener and change listener methods for the button and the slider. So this is why I declared and initialized them globally, but the control panel is also just needed locally, so we can just create it here. So JPanel control panel goes to new JPanel. Let's set a preferred size. So new dimension. Let's also use the width of our frame again. And we have a variable for the height, control panel height, that we can use. Next, we also set a border for this one to see it actually better. So set border factory, create a line border in black, for example, and a thickness of 10. And we use our layout. Yeah, we use for example, you can use a border layout, but also any other layout. No layout is fine. I'm going to use a border layout for the control panel. And then let's already add our control panel to the frame. So control panel, and place it south so that it is placed at the bottom of the control panel that we place in the center. So let's just show you how this now looks like by running our application. So here's our control panel with the black border and a height of 100, and the other panels. And we can see it is fixed in height. So let's continue with the button by, not the slider, the button by setting the text to, for example, because I'm adding the functionality that it does a 50-50 ratio of the two panels, of the left and right panel inside the main panel. So I just call it 50-50. And then we need to add an action listener, so that actually there is something happening when we click on our button, or we can make something happening when clicking on it. So we need to add the action listener, and the action listener is on our frame that we still need to add. And to do this, we need to say that our myFrame implements an action listener interface. And when we implement an interface, we of course need to implement the methods that are defined in that interface. And IntelliJ already recognizes this and knows this, and automatically can implement the method for that we need, and that is action performed. This is the method declared or defined inside the action listener. So here it is created automatically for us. And let's add the button to our control panel. So control panel, add my button. And we have a border layout again. So let's place it somewhere in the button in the control panel. I place it on the top, so we use north. So let's run this. Here we go. So now we have a button, and we can click on it, and nothing happens yet. And it is placed north, so it's the top of the control panel, and it also resizes as we resize our frame window. So let's actually implement the functionality of the button to make our two panels, the left and right panel, adjustable in terms of width at runtime. And in order to know that our button that we clicked is actually my button that we want to use for this, we take our action event and call getSource and compare it to my button, and if this actually is, so getSource returns my button, we want to do something. And what we need to do is we need to set our GridBag constraints again, and we start with the left panel. So we need to set gridX to 0 again, so that our left panel is placed in column 0, not 1. And we want a 50-50 ratio, so we say weight X is 0.5, so 50%. And now to reset the constraints of our left panel, we call our GridBagLayout and say set constraints, and we want our left panel to have the GridBag constraints. And for our right panel, we want to place it on in column 1. We only have one row and 2 columns, so let's say gridX equals to 1. And we don't need to reset weight X now, but just for clarity, let's say set it also to 50%. So if you want a different ratio, you can, for example, set this to 80%, so 0.8, and this to 0.2. So if these two are different, you need to set this one here for the left panel and reset it to a new value for the right panel. And what we say now, we call our GridBagLayout again and set the constraints of our right panel. And now really important, so that everything is updated at runtime, so the changes we made here are actually seen during runtime, we need to call revalidate of our main panel. And when we now launch our application, it should actually work. So now we have this 30 to 70% ratio, and when we click on our button, it will change to a 50-50 ratio. And as you can see, they changed at runtime, and they maintain the 50-50 ratio as we change or resize the frame window. And of course, you can use any JComponents for this. So for example, you could also use buttons and make them resize, or anything, whatever you need. So this is basically it. If you use this, you can basically create any kind of resizable interface at runtime. But just as another example, we are creating or using a slider to better showcase this. We already create the variable for my slider, but we didn't create the actual slider. So let's call new JSlider. It should have minimum value of 0, maximum value of 100, and let's just give it a start value of 30. So because we have a start ratio of our two panels of 30 to 70, So this matches up then. Now we need to add a change listener to our slider. And again, like with the button, we need our myFrame to implement a change listener. And we implement an interface again, so we need to implement the methods that are defined in the change listener interface. So implement methods and state changed method. Hit OK and it is created. If your IDE doesn't do that automatically, you can just type it out. No difference there. So now this one is created. Now we just need to add our slider to our control panel. So control panel dot add my slider and set border layout to south, so that we place it at the bottom of our control panel. So let's just see how this looks like. So here is the slider. I'm starting at 30. So we have a value of 0 on the left, 100 at maximum on the right, and a start value of 30. And we can already move it, but of course nothing is happening yet. For this we need to edit the state changed method that is called when the state of the slider changed. So let's first check if our slider, so my slider is changed. So we take our change event and ask it for its source, and if the source is equal to our my slider, we want to do something. So we go inside this if statement, and to make it a little easier, we use some variables to calculate everything. So first we create a variable my slider value that just contains or stores the value of the slider, and we get the value of the slider using the getValue method of the slider. Now let's calculate the value for our left panel and the value for right panel. Let us just use a float again. Let's call it left and say my slider value divided by 100, so that our value for the weight x property of our grid bag constraints is between 0 and 1. We just divide this by 100, our my slider value. And let's also create a right variable that contains the size for the right panel. And for this we just need to subtract the size of the left panel from 1. So this gets, the right panel gets the space that is left. Yeah, if you can say this way. Right. So now it's basically kind of like the button. We need to set gridx to 0 again, because right now it is still set probably to 1, because this was the last time we changed it. But we want to start by set the left panel, so we need to set this to 0 again. And then we set our weight x to left that we calculated above. So this gets whatever percentage we have from the slider. And again, we call our GridBagLayout and update the constraints for the left panel and pass our GridBag constraints. Now let's do the same thing for the right panel. So and place this inside the right column, so column 1. And the weight x is our right variable that we calculated. Now same thing, we call the GridBagLayout and reset the constraints for the right panel and give it our constraints so that these new values are received by the right panel. And the final thing we need to do is, of course, revalidate our main panel again to make the changes visible. Right, okay, now let's see if this works. So here we go. We have now the slider, and if we use the slider, the size of these two panels should actually adjust at runtime using the GridBagLayout. And as you can see, it works. So we can set it to any ratio, and if we resize it, everything maintains its ratio. And we can of course still use the button to set a 50-50 ratio, or use the slider now. This is it for this video. I hope that I was able to expand your horizon, and thanks a lot for watching, and please feel free to leave any kind of feedback and questions in the comments down below. This is actually my first YouTube video, so I really need or would be thankful for some feedback. And if I explained or said anything wrong, just please correct me in the comments. Yeah, I highly appreciate it. Cheers.